So since we're in Tier 3, let's talk a bit about it. First and foremost, the modeling that exists in Tier 2 belongs to anatomy and accuracy, and within these two, we are going to find shape design, which belongs to the modeling stage, let's say. The shape design is essentially the outline of every internal form that we find on our sculpture. And everything is going to be internal information if turned to the correct side, meaning that if something is contour from one view, it's going to be internal information from the next view. So we both need contours to be accurate, of course, and the internal shape design to be both accurate, but more than that, we need the internal shape design to be good. What constitutes good shape design in sculpture is certainly a bit of an ambiguous topic, and since we're not really there at the moment, let's not dwell on it for too long. Suffice to say, good shape design needs to be specific and not ambiguous. It needs to be devoid or largely devoid of convenient shapes like circles, triangles, and squares. Good shape design should click and lock together, and this is done by making sure that you have many angle breaks per shape. And finally, good shape design should say something about the shape that we're attempting to create. Namely, what is it made of and what does it currently feel like? An example of this would be the nose needs to feel rather different than the brow ridge, and the wrinkles in the forehead should never be confused for bones. They should never feel like bones. The shape design will inform what these shapes look like, of course, but it'll also inform what they feel like and what they are capable of. Shape design is therefore our first chance or attempt at composing with material qualities like hardness and softness. I said I would talk to you about Tier 3 and then proceeded to talk to you about Tier 2. So let's get back on track and talk about Tier 3. As you might have noticed, these tiers, they are going to bleed into each other, which undoubtedly will create a bit of confusion for some of you. But bear with me here, and I hope it will make sense at the end. Tier 3 is volume transition in nature. A lot of work has already been done heading in the direction of volume and transition in previous episode. And pretty much within every step, we are going to be working towards the nature of individual forms. Our work has volume and our work has transitions, as you can see. The 3 tiers, by the way, are not meant as a step-by-step guide as to what to do, but as a list of priorities to focus on at different points in the process. The entire way through, there has been work done that has contributed to the volume. There's hardly any way around this issue, of course. No volume means no sculpture. What we are doing here today is finalizing the volume and focusing solely on this issue, not all the other things that we could consider and cloud our minds with. We have kind of left those issues behind, and we are now focusing on the final parts, the finishing parts of a sculpture. There are multiple ways of reaching a finished surface. Since volume describes how a form turns from one side to the other, how flat or full it feels, and this is what we are trying to finalize while at the same time reaching a finished surface. For all these reasons, I think a tool that can add the final amount of clay and finalize the surface at the same time is the one that we should be looking for. For me, this means a rake is unlikely going to be the tool of choice, since a rake removes material and we are actually after adding volume, which means adding material. Consider what the task at hand is and choose the tool best suited to that task. You could, of course, slightly overbuild every volume and then rake them down to the final volume, but that would, in my eyes, be a slightly more difficult approach, because in order to do that, you will have to, on purpose, misrepresent your subject before trying to represent it. I'm not about misrepresentation. I try to always aim in a direction where accurate representation is the goal. So that's probably not going to be my approach. A large amount of the work you'll see done here will be adding a millimeter or less of clay using my little wooden tool. However, some places there are no way around using a loop tool, and sometimes the wood tool leaves too obvious of a mark in the surface, and at that point I will pull out the loop tool and soften the surface if I have to. This back and forth is going to get me to a final surface that has a bit of dither to it, a little bit of texture to it. It moves and it breathes a bit more than if you just try to make a super smooth surface. Surface is of course a personal preference thing, and you should try out many and find the one that suits your work, of course. Transition is how two forms meet, and here we've been trying to set ourselves up for success for a long time. More space between the forms during the early shape design portion of the process is going to lend itself greatly to better transitions. Imagine a short transition. A short transition is by default going to seem sharper than one that is broader. A broader transition is almost by default a soft transition, and we have mostly very soft transitions happening in the human body. Reserve those short transitions, those short, sharp transitions, for areas of tension, areas where we have folds, and areas where you really want people to look, like the eyes. If we do have those broad areas of transition reserved and prepped for us early on, I find that the transitions almost require no effort. The issue people tend to run into is that they can't balance between sharp transitions and a bloated sculpture with no transitions. Their sculpture will either have one or the other, none of which are good, of course. But the secret here is to reserve enough space for the transition in the early stages. More and more I find that whenever I'm after doing transitions, trying to do transitions, they almost fall into place like magic. There's literally no work to be done almost. And before, I struggled much more with transitions and would often have to dedicate a large amount of time to working on them. More and more I find that the shape design and the reservation of a large space for the transitions mostly solves this issue on its own, without any effort. Now, perhaps there are other things that impact my newfound ease with which transitions are made, but the two mentioned above are the two that are the most obvious to me, and so they're the ones that I'll mention. The ones that I've noticed anyway. Maybe there's some other ones out there.